Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Art by Felix. Today is day 2 of Spooktober 2024, and today's theme is pumpkin. So for today's challenge, I decided to bring 2 of my favorite OCs to the spotlight, Suberus and Scully. So for a little backstory on these 2, Scully was actually the first ever non-anthropomorphic wolf character that I ever had. I adopted him from someone on Instagram back in March of 2019, and he has been a staple in my artwork ever since. Suberus, on the other hand, came into my life in February of 2020 when I adopted him from somebody on Facebook. He is actually my second ever non-anthropomorphic wolf character. The funny thing is, I've never actually drawn these 2 wolves in the same piece before, and I thought, what better time than now? Plus, a pumpkin-themed challenge felt like a good time for them to interact in a fun, spooky way. For the concept of this piece, I decided to have Scully and Suberus sitting around a giant jack-o'-lantern, and I really thought that this would be a good challenge for me because I've only ever drawn a pumpkin once before, and I really had to study what pumpkins look like for this so I could get the shape and the textures right. One thing that I really like about this piece is how Scully and Suberus end up looking together. They look very natural and like they actually belong in the same artwork together. And I think a lot of that has to do with their fur patterns and textures as well. And I also really liked how the pumpkins ended up coming out in this piece. I did add a smaller pumpkin sitting next to Scully just to make the piece feel a little bit more complete. So for those who are wondering, I use an app called Sketchbook for my digital art. I love how the pens flow in this app and how easy it is to navigate. It's honestly a fantastic app, especially for anyone who is just getting into digital art. The best part is that it is free to download on both Android and iOS, but I would like to mention that I am not sponsored by them. I just wanted to share my personal opinion on the app that I use because I think it is a great tool, especially, again, for anyone who is just starting out. So, back to the artwork. I am here just finishing up the line work on the pumpkins, and honestly, the shapes of the pumpkins was the hardest part for me. When I was doing my sketching, I had to redraw the pumpkins at least 4 to 5 times before I got a shape that I actually felt matched what I wanted in this piece. And it actually came out pretty decent in the end, I think. So the longest part of this piece was actually the line art. Getting the lines to look how I wanted them and to make them nice and clean took a while, but that's pretty normal when it comes to artwork. I believe that the line art is typically the longest section. Sometimes it's the coloring, but most of the time it's the line art. So I did come up with a little bit of lore for each of the characters that I used here, but I don't want to get into that today. I probably will jump into the lore of my characters in the future when it's not Spooktober and I'm doing these art challenges. So for Spooktober this year, I did decide to write my own list of topics for each day. If you would like to see that list in its entirety, you can find it on my Instagram at artist_Felix. You can also find posts every day of the pieces that I draw. You can also find me on TikTok, where I post a lot of quicker speed paints for Spooktober, as well as art challenges and other artworks that I like to do. So now we're getting into the coloring on this piece. Right now I am coloring Scully. His color palette is very Halloween-like, with the greens and the purples and just everything that goes along with him. He is one of my more spooky characters that I like to draw typically around October, just because of his color palette. When I color my artwork, I typically just block in the color then go around and clean up the lines. It's just the easiest way for me personally, but I know this isn't the way that most people do digital art. I just don't like using the fill bucket because it doesn't actually fill it all the way, and you have to hit it a couple times, and this is just easier for me. To keep the colors consistent in every piece that I do with my characters, I have character sheets for all of my characters, which you will see up at the top right now in the corners, just so I can copy the color to use. I have drawn multiple character sheets for each of my characters. Scully's character sheet was done back in November of 2023, and I just basically did a 3-point turnaround where you see the front, the back, and a close-up of the face. Both Scully's and Suberus's markings are all done with their colors, so there is no additional line art that has to be done on these characters. Out of the two characters, I believe Scully would be my favorite, simply because I love the muted purple and the bright, vibrant green that is used. And his eyes are also a very pretty pastel purple. They are the same color of the inside of his ears. Here in a moment, you'll see me color Suberus, and his color palette is all grays, and his eyes are blue, which I do like the stark contrast of the vibrancy of Scully and the muted color palette that is Suberus. The colors seem to actually mesh pretty well in this piece. Just right now, I am currently finishing up the markings, especially Scully's face, and I'm about to do his back markings as well. He's got 4 lines that run down his back, and I really like how they look. They kind of remind me of ribs in a way, just the way that they're shaped and where they're placed on him. And now I'm coloring in his ears and eyes as well, just making sure to get all of the final details put into place on him. Here in a moment, you'll see me work on Suberus's colors. His character sheet was done back in February of 2023, and again, it's just a 3-point character sheet, front, back, and also a close-up of the face, which you can see up at the top. And again, his color palette's just very muted grays and a nice muted blue for the eyes, which I love the stark contrast between him and Scully. Again, it just seems to work very well, kind of like a yin and yang situation going on there. Now, the differences in the markings on Suberus and Scully is very prominent, especially in the backs. Scully has the 4 lines that run down his back, kind of like ribs, and Suberus has 3 short little lines that run on his back, and he's also got a crescent moon on both of his shoulders, which, because of the way he's sitting in this piece, you'll only get to see one of those, but you can see both of them in his actual character sheet that I have done. Now, for most of the days during Spooktober, I will be doing a bunch of shading and things with the lighting, but in this piece particularly, I decided to just stay very simple with it, just because I wanted it to focus more on what's in the piece and not just ambiance and stuff like that. I do like how it turns out in the end, especially with, again, the characters and the pumpkins. I end up having to pull a color palette off of Google for the pumpkins, just so I can get a good color going, and making sure that I don't mess up the shades, because I am colorblind and I do kind of struggle with shading sometimes on that. Now here you can see that I'm coloring in Suberus's face, and that's one thing that him and Scully have in common. They both have different colored faces from the rest of their bodies, which kind of makes me feel like they could be related in some way. But again, they're not. It's just a coincidence in how they were created. And Suberus does have these little scars over his eye. I was going to do both eyes, but then I decided just to do one because I think it looked better. And I'm now coloring in his ears, and doing his markings. And like I said, he does have those 3 lines on his back, and they're more triangular in shape. And now his crescent moon is going on his shoulder, and I like the details that they're very simple, but they look very nice on him. And just doing his nose and making sure that everything is done. Now you'll see the color palette pop in from time to time from Google just for the pumpkins and getting all the colors done correctly. And just cleaning up the lines again, just making sure it all looks good and clean. In total, I believe that this piece took me roughly 2, maybe 3 hours to complete. And once it was completed, I really loved how it came out. I think it came out very nice, and it's exactly how I pictured the prompt pumpkin for Spooktober. Just very Halloween-esque, and the fact that there is a jack-o'-lantern and not just a regular pumpkin. And the smaller pumpkin, I do color a little bit lighter than the other one. And it's just, compared to the size of the wolves, the smaller pumpkin is just a regular sized pumpkin. And the jack-o'-lantern is actually like extra big. So it's just a play on sizing as well that I wanted to do with everything in this piece. Now I'm just doing the eyes, mouth, and nose on the jack-o'-lantern right now, which this jack-o'-lantern is not lit up right now, so the inside will be dark and the rest of it will be just a normal pumpkin color. I like how they came out, and it does show some depth in the pumpkin itself using the different shades that I did. And I actually really like how the depth actually shows through this piece on that front. It looks very 3-dimensional, not just flat, which I was kind of worried about it looking kind of flat. And I'm glad that it doesn't. So it's very nice. And I also forgot to color in Scully's tooth, so I had to go back and do that. But now I'm just finishing up the mouth on the pumpkin. And this was probably one of the easiest points to see if I had any other colors that bled over the lines, so I could just clean those up, make sure they look good. And doing the stem on the pumpkin, just nice muted brown color, because that's the color of a pumpkin stem. And I like the comparison. And like I said, this smaller pumpkin is just a little bit lighter in color than the larger pumpkin, just because it's a smaller pumpkin, and the stem is also a lighter color than the other stem as well. So thank you all so much for watching this, and I hope that you all enjoyed, and don't forget to like and subscribe to follow along on the Spooktober journey, and come back tomorrow to see day 3.